Welcome to Brief Encounters, the DC Bar Community's podcast channel. Today's episode is part of our Wellbeing Community series, The 6 Pillars of Wellbeing, which focuses on helping attorneys thrive both professionally and personally. The legal profession is demanding by nature, but your well-being doesn't have to be at the price of your career. This series explores the 6 pillars of wellness and their impact on attorneys, sharing perspectives, tools, and conversations that support a healthier, more sustainable legal profession. Because when you care for yourself, you're better able to care for your clients and your work. Today's pillar is emotional well-being. Here today to discuss the pillar with me is Dr. Tyra Moore. Dr. Moore is the founder of Moore Therapeutic and Consulting Services, a mental health therapy and coaching practice. She is a licensed clinical social worker in the District of Columbia and Maryland, who has over 20 years of experience working in a variety of treatment settings with youth and adults. Her focus has been supporting clients in building healthier, more balanced lives through compassionate, culturally responsive, trauma-informed care. She received her BA in psychology from UNC Chapel Hill, her MSW from the University of Georgia, and her doctorate of social work from the University of Pennsylvania. Much of Dr. Moore's practice experience has been with children and families in the foster care system. In her last position, she was at the Children's Law Center for 9 years, providing consultation to family law attorneys on their most clinically complex cases. She also offered local and national training for family law practitioners around both professional and personal mental health topics. During the pandemic, she formally opened her private practice and currently works with adult clients who are presenting with symptoms related to depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, grief and loss, and racial trauma. Dr. Moore is passionate about helping people move from simply getting through the day to creating lives that feel more connected, sustainable, and fulfilling. Dr. Moore, welcome. It is so nice to have you and to connect today.
Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be a part of this Brief Encounters series and really excited to talk about a topic that's really near and dear to my heart of emotional well-being.
Absolutely. We're thrilled to have you. So to kick us off, just tell us a little bit about your background and work as it relates to well-being.
Well, first, let me thank you for such a lovely introduction. As you said, I have been working as a professional social worker for over 20 years now. I think it's about 22. And I spent the vast majority of the first part of my career working in the child welfare space. So, as you can imagine, emotional well being for children, families, and my fellow colleagues has been a really important topic for me to keep front of mind and for me to be able to talk with all different populations around. For me, emotional well being certainly dovetails or fits nicely into kind of mental health treatment, mental health support. And so that has been a very broad and important part of my career. As you shared as well, I've spent almost 9 years, I think it was, working at the Children's Law Center. So that was a real eye-opening experience to the experience of attorneys, specifically in public service spaces, but generally kind of what attorneys go through from day to day in their efforts to represent often very vulnerable clients on very difficult days of their lives. And so in that space, I spent a lot of time helping attorneys better understand trauma and how trauma impacts mental health, but also impacts physical well being and emotional well being. And then also helping those attorneys really take a moment, take a breath to investigate their own emotional well being, their own mental health, any traumas that might be coming up for them. So that was a really exciting experience. And I think I've learned a lot about how challenging it can be as an attorney to hold your own stuff inside of this challenging work.
Thank you so much. And that leads us really nicely into my next question, which is how does this tier of well-being, emotional well-being, support attorneys in sustaining their work and avoiding burnout?
Yes. So I think you introduced it beautifully at the top of this podcast, really looking at emotional well being as critical to being able to do the work that attorneys or social workers or anyone in the helping field has set out to do. It's not an addition, it's a critical part. And so when we don't pay attention or we don't prioritize emotional well being, what we see is emotional suppression, and that leads to chronic stress. I know that culturally, or what my experience is that inside of the legal profession, individuals are rewarded for endurance, responsiveness, perfectionism. Maybe they wouldn't call it perfectionism, but excellence in service, excellence in work, and maintaining emotional control. Well, often that can lead to compartmentalization and avoidance for the sake of the work of your own emotional experience. What we know from research, but also just, human behavior is that those emotions have to go somewhere. So it can show up as irritability, sleep issues, anxiety, exhaustion, even some cynicism. Despite your passion for the work, you can still feel that cynicism. So when we're looking at how it shows up in ways that can be unhelpful or undesirable, we know that that can affect practice. That can affect how you show up in a difficult client counseling session. That can show up when you're going to court. And not only does it show up in your professional space, but then it shows up in your personal life. And so when you are feeling that emotional depletion or you're feeling that cynicism or that irritability, it can impact decision making, relationships, your creativity, and to be honest, even some ethical judgments. So we want to always be thinking of emotional well being again as a part of practice, not as separate from practice. I think the other thing that I've found is often we try to address issues once we've gotten to burnout stage or we've been experiencing chronic stress for a while. And what I want to remind individuals about who may be listening to this podcast is we don't get to burnout from one stressful case or a stressful role or a stressful year. We get to burnout often because we don't have space for recovery. So, in thinking about it this way, I think it's really important that we think not only individually about emotional well being, but we think about it structurally, we think about it systemically inside of legal organizations. Often the work moves so fast that we don't feel like we have space for that recovery. That often is one of the biggest contributions to burnout. And so I think that when we look at it from this perspective, we can see that talking about emotional well being on the front end can be very much preventative and avoid getting to burnout on the back end.
Thank you for that. So much of what you just said resonated with me, and I know will resonate with our listeners. I think sometimes in the legal field, we use things like dark humor, for example, to kind of mask some of the experiences that we might be having that are, in fact, close to burnout. That came to mind for me. So thank you for sharing that. And again, that idea of not having the space to recover and that leading to burnout, I think will resonate with a lot of folks. I want to shift just for a moment to talk about what are some small, realistic practices someone could start this week to strengthen within this area of well being?
Sure. And but before I answer your question, I want to go back to what you were just sharing about kind of the dark humor
Hmm.
use. And it happens in social work, it happens in lots of helping professions as a way of coping. And so I want to acknowledge that. I think one of the things that I find helpful to acknowledge is sometimes what we're doing is actually trauma bonding. And while it feels good in the moment to connect with colleagues over beers, talking about a difficult case, or connecting with colleagues over a meal or some other event and discussing what's been the hardest parts of your job, of course, that creates community around the struggle, but it also creates a trauma bond in some ways. And so I think that one of the things we have to consider is how to have better boundaries around things like that. So this actually will kind of dovetail into some of the things that I think that could be small changes that could help to have some bigger impact on the back end. And one of those things is setting boundaries, even with colleagues. Like maybe at a happy hour, we'll spend a few minutes talking about some hard things and commiserate. And then we're going to find moments of joy together so that our bonding isn't only around the hard stuff. Our bonding is around what's going well. What are we enjoying about the work, or what feels so meaningful, or what's keeping us there, or what's just going well in our personal lives? What can we celebrate? Who's got a hobby that's exciting and, bringing a sense of joy outside of the work? So, while it might feel like a weird transition in the beginning, I think making space for things other than the hardest parts can be really important to making a shift towards emotional well being for all of us. Taking a step back and kind of coming in from a 30,000-foot view and thinking about what small, realistic practices could help, I like to start with my clients in thinking about a mindset shift, especially with high performing clients who have intense work environments. I like to suggest that we consider that in an emotional wellness space, first, that it's a journey, not a destination. I don't believe, and I haven't seen in my work, that we get to the point where we are solidly in emotional well being land and nothing can shift us off this mark. I think what I find is that, and I tell my clients all the time, life keeps lifing. And so there are going to be times where we're going to feel great and then something's going to change. Our child is going to go to another developmental stage and they're going to feel different to us. Or you're going to get a new supervisor at work. And so I want us to adopt, or I want to encourage individuals to adopt the idea that this emotional well being journey is really a lifetime journey. And that if we move from a space of destination, it can be more exciting and adventurous and creative and flexible. Inside of that, when we see it as a journey, I think it gives us more space to make micro changes versus focusing on massive or major transformation. When our systems are overwhelmed, when our brains are experiencing chronic stress, when we have all of those stress hormones in our bodies don't generally respond well to massive change. So, what can be often more effective is focusing on micro decisions, focusing on micro scaffolding that helps build capacity to do more in the emotional wellness space. Those tiny shifts can really matter and make space for imperfection. So instead of us focusing on getting emotional wellness just right, we can focus on consistency, just showing up, just trying the new thing over and over again until it doesn't feel quite like the new thing. Giving that grace and space helps us to build that scaffolding versus create another shame cycle, which is what makes our chronic stress that much worse, what we believe about ourselves. So that's the mindset shift that I like to offer first. And then I want to offer some things that might be a little bit off of the beaten path, to be honest. I could talk about self care, and I know that's an important part of this conversation, but I do think it's being had pretty frequently in lots of different spaces. Often, what frustrates me about the self care conversation is that it's small behaviors that can make a difference, but don't actually shift our internal state. And so when we think about emotional well being, we want to think about how we engage, how we build awareness around our own emotional experience. So, one of the things I like to offer my clients, and it takes a little bit of getting used to, but I encourage them to go on Google or wherever you get your information on the internet and look up feelings wheels. And I encourage them to download one, whatever feels resonant for them, and to start using it whenever it feels comfortable. My experience, and I think for most of us, when we were growing up, it was a very limited vocabulary, right, around emotion. So sad, mad, happy, frustrated, throw in frustrated, maybe we'll even throw in disappointed. But there's such a wide range of emotions that we start to experience as adults. And sometimes we don't get that vocabulary or that language around what we may be feeling. So I find that a feelings wheel actually helps us to better articulate what's happening for us, which then helps us have a better response. It helps us to determine what we actually need. The metaphor I like to pair with this is around icebergs. So if you think about the Titanic and kind of what happened there, at the top of the surface, right, there's a smaller piece of ice that's sticking up. And that might be your sad, you're mad, you're frustrated, you're irritated feeling. Underneath is the bigger part. It's actually the more dangerous part, to be honest, or the part that needs the most care. Let's say it that way. So if you're thinking about, I'm sad at the top, but what's underneath? Maybe I'm feeling betrayal. Maybe I'm feeling isolation. Maybe I'm feeling, some other feeling. I could be feeling optimistic. Whatever it is, that's really what's going to be important to address when you're thinking about emotional wellness. And so the feelings wheel helps us get to the emotion that's underneath the surface. So I like to offer that. Again, a little off the beaten path, but I think really important even for adults. What I also love is that like you can download one for yourself and download one for your child. And so then you're having a more in-depth, a broader conversation about emotions. I think as we talk about reflection and emotions, we actually need time to do that. And while, it seems reasonable, I think, to wait till the end of the day to take the time, often by the time we've all gotten to the end of our days, we're pretty spent. So, what I like to recommend is looking for transitional moments during the day. So, those are small moments like before I get out of the car to go into the courthouse. It could look like before I walk in my front door, I'm just going to take a walk around the block, or I'm just going to sit on this bench outside the courthouse. Or before I get up from my desk to walk over to the conference room to have this really difficult client meeting, I'm just going to take a breath. Or I'm going to take 5 breaths. I'm going to turn on my Calm app. Or I'm going to go to YouTube and I'm just going to put in something that's like 5 minutes of grounding or 30 seconds of grounding, whatever my system can tolerate. Those few seconds to moments to minutes can really give you an opportunity to check in with you, to see what's happening with you before you do the thing. You can ask yourself questions like, what am I carrying? What tension is in my body? What do I need to release? What has nothing to do with my client, but I'm holding in my body right now? Now, you might not be able to release all of that, right, in 5 minutes or even a 30-second, grounding exercise. But what you can do is settle your nervous system, get in touch with what's happening for you, and then you have the power to decide what happens next. And I find that to be an incredibly powerful tool. The last thing that I'll offer is a 5-minute journal. Now, I get a lot of pushback from my clients when I mention journaling. I got that. Listen, it's difficult sometimes without a prompt or to sit down or to feel like it's going to take an hour or to feel like you're going to experience all this emotional upset. What I love about a resource like the 5-minute journal is the prompts are set and it literally turns into 5 minutes. And the prompts each day are around gratitude. They're around deciding what would make today great, which puts you back in the driver's seat. And you can only choose things that you have power over. And then it asks you what your affirmation is for the day for yourself. At the end of the day, it asks you about gratitude again. It asks you about what you learned about yourself. The prompts again are the same. And what it does is just whittle this down to refocus our brains on something different. When you have to decide for yourself what would make today great, it means you don't have to depend on a certain circumstance or a certain outcome to feel a sense of accomplishment, to choose joy, to choose satisfaction. And then it invites you to slowly build a gratitude practice. So, as I talked about, these micro decisions, these micro changes, the scaffolding that builds into something more transformational, this kind of journal offers you that. And so I really love it as a resource. And again, 5 minutes, I can find 5 minutes. Like I can choose to scroll or I can write in my 5-minute journal. Like literally, those become my choices for the day. And there's no judgment. So again, it's not about perfection. Some days, to be honest, I choose scrolling. And most days I choose the 5-minute journal because it helps reorient my perspective, which then undergirds my emotional well being day in and day out. So I hope those feel accessible.
Wow, absolutely. Thank you so much. There's so much wisdom there and so many practical tools alongside the mindset shifts. I think that information is going to be invaluable to our listeners. So, let's shift to talk about sort of lawyers and their identity. Many lawyers are used to solving everyone else's problems. How can legal professionals recognize when they need support themselves in this area? And what are some healthy ways to seek out that support?
Such a great question. I think in helping fields, it is very difficult at times to know how to balance taking care of self versus the passion you have for the work and taking care of others, especially when you're working with very vulnerable clients. And so sometimes I talk to individuals about the guilt that comes up when they want to prioritize themselves, when they want to prioritize their emotional well being. And when that guilt or that shame keeps coming up, what we find is individuals can end up in a space of emotional numbness or feeling incredibly irritable or feeling that chronic exhaustion where just it's not about sleep anymore. It's just the feeling you carry in your body. Sometimes it's the over commitment to work where you feel like you just can't turn it off. You're thinking about it when you get home, you're thinking about it at dinner, you're thinking about it all night. And so I think what is helpful is to not isolate, but to seek community. And that's very counterintuitive, I imagine, especially in the legal field, where you want to show up and you want to be perceived a particular way by your clients, by your colleagues, by other legal professionals that you're working with. So I think being able to take a step back and to recognize that probably more of your colleagues than not are having difficulties in similar ways. Once we can normalize this experience of chronic stress, experience of feeling numb or having to numb out as a coping strategy, I think then we can make space to have a broader conversation. And my sense is you're going to have a lot more head nods and like, yes, me too's when people are starting to open up the conversation and can push past that feeling of maybe insecurity or vulnerability. And I want to acknowledge that that's real, even for, social workers or psychologists being able to say like, I'm not well right now can be really difficult. But I've found every time I've opened up that conversation, there's community that builds around, okay, how do we support each other? How can we be better together? And that opens up the opportunity for creative strategies. So, emotional wellness, I think, honestly, is really hard to achieve in isolation. It really needs community. We need community. That's how we're kind of wired and built. So, I think I encourage professionals to at least open the dialogue with someone they trust to be able to then figure out what resources are available. There are often too resources such as employee assistance programs that I think are very underutilized, often because I think people don't know that it will be kept confidential or that individuals, to be honest, just don't know that it exists and that it's a free service. So it's definitely something that I think that could be a resource that would help then determine what kind of long-term strategies or care you'd like to be able to address what's coming up for you. In the event that an individual might not be ready to fully share where they are, what they're experiencing, I think there are some books out there that can be really helpful. One is Trauma Stewardship and really talks about what it feels like as a professional to carry that load of wanting to show up as compassionate and caring for others while also being affected by your work. Another book that I think that could be really interesting to explore is The Body Keeps the Score. And this is a book that I find really accessible because it helps to start to understand how trauma, which for professionals can be more like vicarious trauma or the trauma they experience by hearing the stories of others, This can be really helpful, I think, in starting to understand what those impacts might be on you and on your body and where you might be carrying or storing trauma. And just to throw in something that I meant to share earlier, many of us are attracted to this kind of work because of something that's happened in our lives or something we've witnessed or something we've just been passionate about changing. So I always recommend to individuals to consider that sometimes what's coming up is the very thing that's drawn you to the work. And that's really normal. So to go and get some support around that can be really helpful to manage all of the things you might be experiencing, even when you're exactly in the place you want to be, doing the thing that you want to be doing. The last resource I'd like to offer is a book that's written specifically for attorneys. It's called The Happy Lawyer, and it explores why an attorney might struggle with fulfillment despite having that success and what that intersection looks like. So I wanted to offer those as some resources to consider in addition to maybe going to your EAP or in addition to maybe even checking on a website like psychologytoday.com and looking for a therapist that might be helpful just to have a safe space to talk about what you're going through.
Thank you for all of those really practical resources. And I really appreciated that there was something there for everybody, no matter sort of which place they are in their journey. There was something that you offered there that would be accessible to them. So thank you for that. For our final question, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Moore, if listeners remember just one thing about emotional well-being and its importance for lawyers, what would you want that takeaway to be?
I'd like to offer two, if that's okay.
Sure, of course.
The first, just remembering that emotional wellness is a journey and it's not a destination and it's not something to get right. The second thing I'd like to offer is just that taking care of yourself, it's not separate from your effectiveness. It's not separate from being successful. It's what helps sustain all the things that are really important to you and that align with your value system.
Thank you. Wow, you have offered so much here, Dr. Moore. I can't thank you enough for joining us for this conversation. We really appreciate your perspective. And as we close, I just wanted to ask you to share, if you're willing, how someone who might hear this podcast and who is seeking support could reach you if they would like to get in touch.
Yes, great. Thank you for that opportunity. My practice, I can be found on the internet at moretherapeuticservices.com or email at moretherapeuticservices with an S at gmail.com. Or I guess I could throw out a phone number too, 240-800-6955. I'd like to say that certainly I am happy to work with clients that fit into the space of my expertise. But the other service that I really am even more passionate about, to be honest, is connecting individuals to the right space and place. So sometimes I'm not always the right provider, but it's really important to me that anyone that reaches out to me ends up landing in a place that feels safe and healthy and supportive. So even if we don't match as provider and client, or I'm not licensed in your jurisdiction, please don't hesitate to reach out because I'd love to be a support and a resource to get you connected to someone who can.
Really appreciate that. Thanks for listening. If today's conversation resonated with you, we'd love to have you join us. The DC Bar Wellbeing Community is open to those who want to be a part of building a healthier legal profession. Visit the DC Bar website to learn more and become a member. There's always something happening. From live programs to on-demand resources, DC Bar Communities offers a wide range of well-being activities to meet you where you are. Head to the DC Bar website for a full list of upcoming and on-demand programs. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe to Brief Encounters, and be sure to check out Toward Wellbeing, the DC Bar's Lawyer Assistance Program podcast channel, for even more conversations dedicated to your well-being. Join us tomorrow as we discuss the third pillar of lawyer well-being, the physical pillar. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you next time.